trauma for you, and I'm going to read you a definition of trauma. It's my hope that this will break it down, and then you and I can together further break it down so you can more fully understand this idea of trauma itself. Trauma is an emotional response to an intense event that threatens or is believed to threaten survival or actually causes harm. It's often a stress that exceeds one's ability to cope with or accept the emotions involved in the experience. It's also an event that a person cannot control, or in which there's a perceived lack of control. If you recall, in my first introduction, what I said was I quite often see a lot of patients that have highly controlling behaviors. It doesn't please the person, it doesn't please their family or partners or colleagues, but they don't understand where the behavior comes from, the behavior that needs to control the environment. My take is that it always comes from unconscious and unresolved trauma. So, because this is an event that a person cannot control, trauma victims will often have thoughts of what if, or if only, related to the event or events in order to gain some level of control by reimagining the traumatic event itself. And don't worry, you guys, I'm going to break this down into very understandable components, but I'm giving you all of it on the front end so we can begin to discuss and deconstruct as we go. Trauma may result from a single distressing experience or from recurring events of being overwhelmed. It can be precipitated over weeks or years or even decades as the person struggles to cope with the immediate circumstances, eventually leading to serious long-term negative consequences. Having to tolerate what feels intolerable. This makes a person over time fear strong or negative emotions. And so from my perspective as a psychotherapist, I fully believe that you have to be able to feel it all in order to heal it all. Feeling it is part of the way through to get to healing. You have to feel it to heal it. And throughout this series of videos, I'll be dropping in my little Sophia-isms about what I believe is most helpful as we navigate our own healing. So fear of strong or negative emotions lead people to distraction. They lead people to dissociation. Now, I want to tell you a story. At the beginning of my career, I got a series of initial jobs working in treatment and recovery centers. It's pretty ordinary for newly graduated graduate students in psychology to get these sorts of jobs. And during one of these jobs, when I was counseling addicts, and by the way, addiction does not happen in a vacuum. It happens for very specific reasons. We'll get into that later. But I had a patient at one of these treatment facilities, and this patient continued to say that she would rather, quote, slam dope than feel uncomfortable. So if we notice addiction is an attempt to change our internal and felt experience of ourselves. And I really, because I'm not an addict, I really couldn't wrap my head around how could somebody believe that slamming heroin, i.e. shooting heroin, slamming dope, is a better choice than feeling uncomfortable. And this woman, this patient of mine, fully believed that this was her choice. She couldn't tolerate the feelings of discomfort in her own nervous system, the autonomic, the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, which we will get into shortly. She couldn't tolerate her felt experience of herself. And so her distraction, or we might call it a dissociation, she discovered heroin is the perfect dissociative move. On heroin, she feels one thing. Without heroin, she has to sit with, inside of herself, feeling her own levels of discomfort, confusion, distress, and upset. And this is what I mean by you have to feel it to heal it. And I started in my work with this woman calling uncomfortable the dreaded uncomfortable, because addicts typically dread feeling what it feels like inside of their own skin, and they will do almost anything to change their felt experience. And in order to find out why it's so distressing to be inside yourself in acute distress and discomfort, we have to work forensically, front to back. And I will get into that shortly.